first, I need to do an introduction of myself. I'm currently a student at Nanjing Foreign Language School, and I'm doing a project researching how foreign people are enjoying their lives in Nanjing and about the challenges. So to start with, could you please also make an introduction?
Absolutely. My name's Felix, and I'm a teacher here at Nanjing Foreign Language School, and I've lived here for more than 11 years. Before that, I visited briefly Hainan for a few months and Guangzhou and Guilin before, but this is my permanent residence, was always in Nanjing since 2013.
So how's life going on? Are you enjoying it?
Absolutely, yeah. It would be challenging, to say the least, if I didn't enjoy it here, to stay so long. But I think a big part of it is because I'm married, right? My wife is Chinese, and so because of that, it's a lot easier to be able to enjoy and understand life in China. I can trust that her answer will be in both of our benefit, right? Sometimes I might ask some other people, co-workers and other Chinese friends that I have, but more often I can feel safe finding something out about China or what should I do and so on from my wife. Yeah.
So could you please use a few words to describe how you feel about Nanjing?
Nanjing, absolutely. Nanjing is one of my favorite cities in the world, let alone in China. I think Nanjing, if I had to use just single words to describe, I'd say Nanjing is modern, it's calming, and it's beautiful. I really enjoy the greenification of the city. Lots of trees everywhere. There's Purple Mountain in the middle of the city. The life is interesting. There's always new things to discover, but it's never like pushy, if you know what I mean. It's sort of like London and Shanghai and Guangzhou. They're a bit more like frenetic. People sort of get out of my way. I need to work, rushing around. Yeah.
So have you visited like any tourist spots?
Sure. Yeah, Nanjing spots, most of them. Yeah. I do love Purple Mountain. I would say probably Ming Xiaoling, the Ming Tomb is really great. Zixiahu is really just perfect, because if you need to get away from city life, it's just right there and it's easy to get to, and you walk around and you feel it's like calm and quiet, and you feel like you're maybe far away from a city, and it's really beautiful. And you're not supposed to swim there, but of course some people do, and so even if you're not swimming, it's nice to dip your feet in the summer and so on. Yeah.
So do you find Nanjing a first choice? I mean, Nanjing is a big city, but it's not as that international as maybe Shanghai or Beijing. So what drives you here?
Well, I knew that I wanted to move to China for sure, and I knew that I wanted to live in a city that was, had at least some of the things that I was used to in the UK, from my life in the UK. But I also didn't really want to live in a city that was extremely fast-paced. Like, I lived in London before and it was great, but it was also tiring. Nanjing is not too, like we've mentioned, it's not too pushy, it's not too energetic, right? But it can be, right? There are places where you can go to be energetic, of course. But I like a city that has a long history, that's beautiful, and big enough, but not too big. I think if I wanted to go to an international city, it's like, well, I could have stayed in London, but I wouldn't want to do that anyway. I could go to Shanghai or I could live in Hong Kong, but these places don't really interest me so much. And the same with, like, in Japan, I just don't have that much interest to visit Japan, because it just feels like big city, fast pace of life, no real nature relaxation feeling. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think your hometown is not London, right? 'Cause
Right.
I thought you were born near Liverpool.
No, no. I'm from the southwest of England, where it's very green and it's very sort of surrounded by nature. So living in a city like Nanjing is, in some ways, it's directly the opposite of what I grew up with. Very, very different.
Have you found any differences between the two people, the Chinese people and the English people?
Sure. I mean, you can find differences between any peoples if you're looking hard enough. I think what's interesting is there are some small differences in customs and ways of doing things, and then there are some bigger differences between patterns of behavior. And generally speaking, most people in the world are very similar, right? We have the same wants, we have the same desires, we have the same end goals, dreams, and so on. But I think the way that we do them are slightly different. So perhaps some small differences like that are little etiquette, manners about eating and so on. In China, there's a tradition of high politeness, sort of standing when somebody important comes in, where to sit at the table and so on, these types of things. In Britain, that's usually decided by some sort of personal aide or a manager or something. Somebody arranges everything, and everybody else doesn't need to think about it. So it's not like an automatically understood idea in Britain, like, oh, I shouldn't sit here because somebody else is more senior to me or something like this. When to raise a glass or things like that. Just small differences. I think overall in China, people tend to be more polite, slightly more polite than British people, a little. Now that's interesting because I actually think British people and Chinese people are very similar in a lot of ways, especially about how to not be rude and not, say things and so on. Whereas America is directly the opposite of both of these, right? It's very sort of like, say exactly what's on your mind. Whereas Britain and China were much more like, hold back about it. I'd say those are the biggest differences.
Are people getting more helpful because you're a foreigner, or just because they're helpful in general?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would think probably less likely to be willing to help me as a foreigner. An individual by themselves, if there's nobody else around, will be very, willing and almost feel obligated to try to help me. But I feel like that might be the case for anybody. If there's nobody else around, one person and one other person are more likely to be amicable to each other. So I don't think that's anything to do with me being a foreigner. But in public spaces, I think Chinese people are much more likely to be on the side of other Chinese people. So I would probably only get help from somebody if I already knew them in the street. However, that being said, I have seen Chinese people helping foreigners as well. Though again, I don't think it's more likely to happen because I'm a foreigner. I think more likely I'm probably somebody is going to be less willing to engage with me because I'm not Chinese and they don't understand or they don't know what might happen if they help me or something.
So last week I met a group of international students. They're from Pakistan. Like they gathered together to tour the city. And to some last week we went to Nanjing. And do you think this is a good way to get adapt to a new environment, or should they try to get closer to local people?
I think there's advantages to both. I do think spending time with natives is maybe the best way of learning about a culture and learning about a place. Going to visit some places can give you an idea, but not, it's like, you know, if you remember my teaching, there was some moments where I was teaching people there's two types of learning. The first type is experiential learning, learning by doing things. And the other is learning like facts and information. Yeah. And they're two separate ways of learning. Learning facts is very useful, but it's not applied to life. So I think going to a place like a museum, for example, or learning some facts can be very useful, but it's not how do you apply that to life. Whereas spending time with local people, like talking to them, asking them questions, getting to know what they're like, that's an experiential learning. That's a way of learning about how things are in life. So I think it's probably better or more useful to spend time with local people, I'd say.
Yeah, so like, can you maybe give some advice to those foreign guests that have just come to a new place, in this case especially Nanjing?
Yeah.
How can they better get into this country, get into this city, and get into this culture?
Absolutely. My number one piece of advice that I always tell expats coming to China is try your best not to treat this place like it's the same as home. Like, you should expect things to be different, you should expect people to behave differently, and you should be respectful of that. And if you're respectful of the differences between what you are used to and what's normal here, things will be easier for you and people will be more willing to be friendly and helpful and so on towards you. That's my biggest advice.
And then what about the local people that are trying to help foreign people? Should they be trying to figure out what's going on, maybe on the foreign people every time, or should they just help them when the foreign people are asking for help?
Well, okay, two things. First, I'll say it's the same thing. I've seen a lot of Chinese people helping foreigners and expecting to be treated with gratitude in the same way that Chinese people behave, and then being disappointed because that's not the same way as, say, Americans or British or whatever do. And so then they feel annoyed. Why aren't they doing, the same thing or something like that? So it's about responding with the same understanding. These people are not going to behave the way that I'm used to. So that's important. And then the second part was understanding that people may not want you to help if they're not asking for help. Sometimes maybe a person is just trying to figure things out for themselves. I generally, my own personal thing is help when somebody asks or when they're very clearly desperate.